Have you ever gone through a situation or had an encounter, or you've gone through something that's left a big impact on you, like been in an accident or experienced assault or a tragic, unexpected loss of a loved one? If you answered yes, you might have gone through what's known as trauma. Trauma is a word that is often used in everyday language, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around it. So today we are taking a deeper look at what trauma is, because I think it's really important to know the reality of what trauma is. So let's dive in. Let's first define what trauma is. Now, according to the American Psychological Association, they define trauma as the following. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. It's important to note that trauma is not based only on the event itself, the event that took place, but trauma, more importantly, is our body's response to the thing that took place. That's why, for example, let's say two people get in the same exact car accident. One can walk away and not be fully impacted mentally and emotionally, and the other will walk away where they are now paralyzed, or they feel fear or scared of getting in another car again due to the accident. So it's the same event, but two totally different responses. And that is something that's really important to note when it comes to trauma, because oftentimes our trauma will be invalidated, or we tend to invalidate other people's definition of their trauma because we don't understand. Okay, so let's talk about big T trauma and little t trauma. Big T trauma is going to be what most would consider traumatic. A serious car accident, or an unexpected loss, or an assault, or going to war. Those would be considered big T traumas, again, where most people would consider those events being traumatic or leaving an impact on most people who've experienced or walked through those similar situations. Then you have what's known as little t trauma. And little t trauma is typically trauma that's impacted on a personal level. And so, for example, let's say you go through a really rough relationship and you have a really bad breakup. That can be considered traumatic to the person who's experiencing it. But it's considered little t trauma because maybe on the grand scheme of things, or on the big scale of things, not everybody who's had a bad breakup would explain that as being traumatic, but it does not invalidate the fact that it was traumatic for you. So again, little t trauma is going to be more on the personal level, like a breakup or being harassed or bullied. So again, things that are typically negative experiences, but maybe won't have the same impact on everybody who goes through it. Now, when it comes to types of trauma that most people will experience, there's going to be three different categories. Number one, it's known as acute trauma. ACUTE, not acute, but one word, acute trauma. And that simply means a single event, a single traumatic event. Again, like a car accident or experiencing assault of some sort. Type number two is going to be chronic trauma, and this is going to be prolonged trauma, or things that happen over and over again. Types of trauma that fall under this category would be domestic violence, or child abuse, or bullying. Things that happen over a period of time, and it's a repeated situation that creates a traumatic experience. And category number three is going to be complex trauma, and that simply means it's an exposure to multiple events. So some examples of this would be experiencing neglect as a kid, or going to war, so being exposed to war. So again, the three main types of trauma are going to be acute trauma, a single event. Number two is chronic trauma, which is repeated or prolonged events. And then number three is complex trauma, which is an exposure to certain events. Okay, so we've been talking a little bit about some of the common reasons for trauma. I want to go a little more in depth on some of the common causes of trauma. Now, again, I do want to clarify that I may not list everything in the causes, and that does not take away your trauma. It does not invalidate your traumatic experience if you don't hear one of the causes in the list that I say. Traumatic is a personal experience, and it's a personal connection to something that you have walked through. The first possible cause of trauma can be witnessing or experiencing things like domestic violence, some sort of assault or abuse, and war. Not only is it traumatic when we are experiencing those things, but it can also be just as traumatic witnessing those things. A lot of times kids who grow up in homes where there's domestic violence, that will impact the kid and their future relationships. Cause number two could be being in, or again witnessing, something like a car accident. Now, I have witnessed fatal car accidents and I have been part of serious car accidents, and both were traumatic for me. When I was 16 years old, I had a little 98 Sunfire, which I don't know if anybody even knows what that is, but it's a little car, two-door car, and I was on the road, or I was on my way to go visit somebody, and I was driving this way, and all of a sudden, this F-250 truck with a tractor trailer attached to it didn't stop, didn't see the stop sign, whatever may have happened, and T-boned me. Being in the little car that I was, it literally was a miracle that I got out of the car with minimal damage. And I think the bigger part of that for me was my sister was actually supposed to be in the car with me. And when that truck hit me, I could literally go like this and touch the other side of the door. And so she would have been gone. And so that was super traumatic. I've also witnessed car accidents that ended up taking somebody's life, and that is something that has stuck with me and does stick with me. And when I go around the area where I saw that again, I get flashbacks. Not only being in traumatic situations again, but witnessing traumatic situations will leave an impact and can leave an impact on you as well. And so just because we're not always a part of something, or just because we're not part of a traumatic situation, doesn't mean witnessing that traumatic situation won't create trauma within us as well. Cause number 3 of trauma can be natural disaster, especially when it comes to homes being destroyed or places being destroyed, or when it takes somebody's life. In these past few years, I feel like we've been hearing a lot of natural disasters, whether it was the fires in Hawaii, whether it was the earthquake in Morocco. There are things that are happening all over the world, natural disasters that obviously we don't have control over, but it's taking lives, it's destroying homes, it's creating a sense of unease and taking away feelings of safety in certain spaces. That is going to create trauma especially with those who are living in that place, in that city, in that area. It's easier to see the physical impact of natural disasters, but it's also important to remember that when natural disasters happen, there is a mental and emotional impact, and there is trauma that's tied to natural disasters as well. A common cause of trauma number 4 can be due to an unexpected death or a loss of a loved one, and this can come in all forms. Death in itself is not easy. Losing someone that we love in general is not easy, and it's especially true when it's an unexpected death. So whether it's due to car accident or a sudden sickness, again, something that we just didn't see coming. And with life, there are a lot of things that we don't see coming. And so typically one of the responses that we will have as humans when we lose a loved one unexpectedly, or somebody that we were close to unexpectedly, that will create a sense of trauma, that will leave a remnant of trauma within us, and something that we will have to work through. When it comes to causes of trauma, it's important to note that trauma can be caused by nature, so again, natural disasters and things that happen in nature, but it also, and probably more often, can be caused by other humans. So what are some common reactions when we experience a traumatic event? Well, let's dive into that. Reaction number 1, there's going to be an intensity in feeling, meaning we are going to be unpredictable. There's a feeling of unpredictability where one moment we're really good and another moment we are really struggling and dealing with a lot of anxiousness and depressive episodes. So it's intense emotions and intense emotional reactions that maybe weren't there before. Number 2, and this is a big one that I see a lot in my office when meeting with clients, is a sensitivity to our environment. So meaning like certain smells, certain tastes, certain things that we hear or see. So let's say, for example, there is a backfiring of a car. Oftentimes that will sound like a gun, and maybe somebody who's gone through war, that can be a really triggering sound. And so there's a sensitivity to our surroundings because it will often trigger the moment that the traumatic situation happened. Common reaction or response to trauma number 3 is, more often than not, there's going to be a strain in relationships. When we experience a trauma, it can be really isolating. Let's say, for example, you experience an assault. When that kind of stuff happens, we are in our head a lot and we are overwhelmed with what happened in the traumatic event itself. But what's happening externally is that relationships are starting to be strained, whether it's due to we don't trust people as much anymore, whether it's due to we just don't feel comfortable, whether it's due to we don't know how to talk to them. And so naturally things just start to separate. So relationships then start to become strained, and that's a normal reaction or response from a trauma. Another common reaction or response from trauma is mental and behavioral changes. I would say nightmares is a pretty well-known reaction or response from a traumatic situation where we go into our subconscious and we constantly relive the situation that took place. Another way it impacts us mentally and behaviorally is how we start taking care of our body, whether it's we aren't eating as much anymore, or we're not sleeping, or we're doing the opposite where we're eating too much or we're sleeping too much. Troubles in concentrating. So you may be sitting in a class, you may be sitting at work, and it's hard to focus on what's going on because your mind is just wrapped up in what has taken place and the trauma that your body is holding on to. And then also withdrawing and disassociation. That is, again, really common with trauma, where disassociation is the idea where you know where your physical body is, but mentally you are just not there. So physically, let's say you are in the classroom or you are at your desk, but mentally you are in a completely different world. So you are withdrawing from the environment around you. And then last but not least, a common response or reaction is going to be physical. One of the best books on how our body holds on to trauma physically is going to be The Body Keeps Score. It is a book that goes very much into detail about how our body literally holds on to trauma and how to kind of work through it. And so anyway, when it comes to trauma, physically our body will literally hold on to it. So we will deal with things like muscle tensions, again, headaches, or feeling fidgety, or just not feeling comfortable in our own skin. Heart problems can ensue, stomach issues can ensue. And so that's another key aspect of how trauma impacts us. It will impact us physically. How do we work through it? Can we work through it? There are definitely things we can do to help the process of working through trauma. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to make a note that when we have experienced trauma, it's not easy to work through it. There is no timeline to work through it. There is no magic potion, and everybody's healing process from trauma is going to look different, and that's okay. I think sometimes when we go through a traumatic situation, especially if we feel like it's small or invalid, we feel shame or we judge ourselves for not healing quicker or doing better quicker. And I think that trauma is so unique to each individual. The situations are so unique to each individual. And just like that, I think the healing process is going to be so unique to each individual. So in the process of healing, I think the best thing that we can do is give ourselves grace. Give ourselves the permission to figure it out as we're trying to navigate the really rough and unpredictable road of healing from a traumatic situation. So with that being said, let's talk through some practical ways on how to heal and work through trauma. Number one, and I think I say this in almost every video, but that is lean in to your healthy community. I mentioned before that trauma can often isolate us, and it can make us believe that nobody's trustworthy, especially when our trauma happens at the hands of another human. The idea of leaning into people that we know can be really scary and can be really overwhelming. And so I think the circle should be small and will be small, but learning to lean into your healthy community and surrounding yourself with a safe place to land and to figure out the season of life that you're in. Number two, try not to avoid the situation and the trauma that happened, but learn to acknowledge it. One of the things I see in my office is there's a avoidance of acknowledging what really happened or the reality of what happened, where there's either A, complete avoidance, or B, there's the brush off of, well, it's not that big of a deal. People have gone through this before. I'll be fine. The more that we avoid, the bigger the trauma will become to us. And eventually what we were avoiding will completely take over us. We can't heal from things that we are avoiding. And so in order to fully heal from something, I think we have to learn to fully acknowledge that. Another way to heal or to work through trauma is by taking care of you, implementing and practicing self-care. So this can look like being intentional with what you're eating. This can look like being intentional with your sleep, but learning to take care of your body. As we mentioned before, trauma physically impacts our body. And when it comes to the healing process and recovery process, learning to take care of us is going to be one of the best things for us. Taking care of ourselves can also look like practicing quiet time or mindfulness or meditation, or just making sure that we are staying active and healthy. So maybe taking some yoga or Pilates or things that are just moving your body. There are a lot of things that we are out of control in when it comes, especially when it comes to traumatic situations. And so when it comes to the healing process, learning to focus on the things that we can control, like taking care of ourselves in the process, is going to just help us mentally, but it's also going to help us physically as well to heal from the trauma that took place. Last but definitely not least, and an important part of healing and working through trauma, is seek some professional help. It's a financial investment. I know that not everybody has the means, but if possible, seek some professional help. There are great therapists out there who want to partner with you in your healing journey and who will be able to partner with you. Therapists who specialize in EMDR is a great option, or somatic therapy, or cognitive behavior therapy. Those are some therapies and types of therapists that can be great for your healing process when it comes to a traumatic event. You can use tools like Psychology Today to look up different therapists in your area and what they specialize in. When it comes to seeking out professional help and therapists in working through trauma, you can actually look up a lot of their bios and see if they specialize in trauma. And if they do, that might be somebody to check out. If you financially invest in healing and working through it, it's going to be one of the best financial decisions and one of the best investments that you have made for yourself. Therapists can help you understand your triggers. Therapists can help you rewire some of the thinking or brain patterns that happened during the trauma that you experienced. Therapists can help in ways that maybe other people can't. And so seeking professional help is a great way to heal and recover from a traumatic event. I know we all have our stories. I know we all have things that we have walked through. I also know that there are some of us out there who have gone through trauma and we've avoided it. We've been invalidated in it. We haven't been able to give ourselves the permission, or we haven't been granted the permission to heal from it. And I am encouraging you, if that is you, if you have found yourself in a season where you are struggling, or you have found yourself in a space where you haven't been able to acknowledge and heal from the trauma that you have experienced, I am hoping that this video is encouraging. I'm hoping that this video is empowering, and I'm hoping that this video enlightens you to seek the help and start the healing that you so deserve. As always, if you're not yet part of this family, I would love for you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and turn on your notifications. That way you're notified when brand new episodes are ready for you to check out. If you're interested in all things mental health, therapy, and faith, then this is the space for you. Be sure to tune in next week for more mental and emotional health tips, tricks, and information. Until next time, guys.